around the queer being, but African queer being, especially in scholarship. And I think when the QueerTalk series began, it was a space where we could talk about all things queer and thinking about the emerging and established scholars who are thinking and writing about queer people in Africa. And I think when we began in 2021, one of the dreams was to actually be able to host Prof. Mathebeni and Gibson Ngube, and this has happened, such an honor. But also the conversation that we're going to have today on queer masculinity is something that has been lingering and that we've been really grappling with within the chair. I remember meeting Dr. Lwando Scott at a writing retreat, and this is something that he was really writing about, and I had an opportunity to look at some of the work that he's been doing. And Prof. Mathebeni has really been interested also in questioning or interrogating the concept of queer masculinities. And earlier on this year, we managed to partner with University of Fort Hare, with Prof. Gunkel and several others. Paulina, I see you there, to try and also unpack what queer masculinities are, what they could look like, and what opportunities they could present. Because often when we talk about masculinities, I guess queer masculinities always occupy a marginal space, but perhaps they offer us something, they offer us alternatives to think about masculinities. So I'm very happy for us to be having this conversation today online, along with others. And also we are commemorating the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. And again, I mean, we could extend it to other phobias. So thank you very much. I don't want to take much of our time. I want to welcome Prof. Mathebeni, who's going to facilitate the session. Landa Mabenge, who's also a Canon Collins Scholar for 2024. I welcome Mthunzikazi, Mbungwana, Scholar 2024, and Dr. Lwando Scott, who's also a scholar and a postdoctoral fellow. So, Prof. Mathebeni, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Princess, and thank you, Gillian. Hello, everybody. It's fantastic to be able to gather together on this Friday. As Princess says, it's also a commemoration of IDAHOBIT, and perhaps this this conversation that we are interested in today is also, about commemorating this day and also making realizations about other things that are happening in the world. So IDAHOBIT this year, as in the years past, it comes at a moment of crisis in the world and at the moment. So we're interested in asking, perhaps not only today, but generally, to ask about queer masculinities at this time. In the time of crisis, in the time of the war and the siege in Gaza, the violations against Palestinians. We're asking what could this mean for queer people in times of crisis? But we're also asking about what queer masculinities could mean in moments of political uncertainty, where we see hegemonic masculinities continue to gain ground. We see this in many parts of the world. In our continent, in the African continent, there are going to be elections in most countries. And election time is also a time where we do see certain forms of hegemonic masculinities taking center stage and parading and having much of a voice. So it's an interesting time to think about queerness, to think about queer masculinities together in these moments. In South Africa, we'll be facing elections in exactly 12 days. So that would be very interesting, but also, I think it's many queer people are asking questions, and many feminists are asking questions about, what this means at this moment, and what is the state of queerness and queer masculinities, etc. So, I mean, this is not the only conversation we're having. We're just opening up the space to think about queer masculinities at this time and from this location. So we have 3 panelists: Lwando, Landa, and Mthunzikazi. So I'm going to invite each of them to just start off and perhaps just say a few, in 3-4 minutes, to say a few opening remarks about their own positioning in terms of thinking about queer masculinities. And then we'll take the conversation from there. So I will start with you, Landa, if that's okay.
Yes, that is okay. Hi, Prof. It's good to see you. Haven't seen you in years. We miss you here in the Western Cape. Thank you for this opportunity. So for me, thinking about and trying to weave the, idea of queer masculinities, the reality of queer masculinities in my work, in the way that I'm trying to approach the work that I do is really
did we lose Landa, or is the network from my side? Can someone give me a heads up?
I think we lost Landa.
Okay.
between what's desirable.
Oh, Landa,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes, I think your network had some issues. So do you mind starting again?
Am I back now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was just saying that in my work, it's looking at within the context of trans identities and the navigation of queerness, masculinities within that context, especially looking at the fact that there's a gap in literature. Also, how trans men navigate existing dominant hegemonic forms of masculinities, where there's a negotiation between assimilating to the traditional overt form of masculinity vis-a-vis a more subordinate form of masculinity. But there's always this thread of what exists being entrenched in terms of a misogynistic, compulsory heteronormativity, and one trying to navigate that. So that's what I'm trying to sort of the landscape I'm trying to read into in terms of the work. I do also think that for trans men in particular, there is, there's not a sufficient repository of what could be desirable forms of evolving identity and what is available, especially given the violations, discriminations, and exclusions, particularly when seeking access to healthcare, for an example, where that will be at the, experiences from the providers of care. People are supposed to help navigate the constructions and the evolution of those masculinities. So I think for me that's where I see and try and locate it in terms of the work that I do. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Landa. I mean, you started already with a bang. There's a lot of issues that we can unpack in just the short intro you've given around, and I like that you specifically focusing on trans masculinities and in particular trans men. So I think we will revisit those that as we go on. So everybody who's in the platform, so just let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to to put in your questions, your comments, your remarks on the chat section as we go along. There will be an opportunity for us to engage once the discussion is opening up. So thank you so much, Landa. So let me now move on to Mthunzikazi.
Thanks, Prof. Mathebeni. So for me, and I've been battling with this, with the work and just the everydayness, is to say where we are. So I feel like we're starting from the beginning, because for me, it starts with literature and the language. And then I'm at the intersection then of literature, language, and queer studies. Because in the literature that I consume as a writer, as a teacher, and as an active member of the society, I do not find people that look like me. or indomkaise nononga indoda. I don't find that, so that is where I am trying to. So I might be, and this is the fact actually, that we are 200 years, 300 years far compared to the what you call popular culture, you know. So that's where I am to say, define, you know, find names. And I know that we inhabit names, we inherit names, but we also give ourselves names. And also I'm looking at interpretations and limitations of these names and terms. But at the same time, I'm also trying to think about maybe trying to get to pre-colonial stage. What were these names? Was it important now? But centering and focusing on umdu, because that is the important thing that I think it's, yeah, I'm all over trying to think that, but the thing is umdu. So in all that we're doing, that we don't leave umdu, which umdu becomes from spirit, you know, umdu, like umdu, umoya. And what I'm focused on is because everything you want to say how, hi, when you're greeting someone, hi, how are you? You know, dear Pila. So the important thing, you want to feel like, how are they spiritually, like as umdu. So that is where I am. Yabule.
Okay, thank you, Mthunzikazi. So we already have two issues that we have to grapple with today. So I like that you are introducing issues around language, and also rethinking perhaps, or what you are inviting us to do is to think about this notion of queer masculinities as a notion that is beyond a specific body. A notion that is embodied in umdu, the being. So let's see how far that goes, because part of what I'm interested in doing is to say, can we, as we have this conversation today, can we think of queer masculinities that are not, that do not reside in bodies, and masculinities around the environment, in the built environment, masculinities, queer masculinities in plant formations, queer masculinities, you know, everywhere. So yeah, so let's see how far the conversation goes. But that's very exciting. Thank you, Mthunzikazi, for opening that. Lwando, let's hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to be among all of you. So I'll jump right in. So my name is Lwando Scott, as everybody knows, and I'm based at the Center for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape. And I was thinking about how to approach this. So I suppose the question that is posed now by Prof is, you know, kind of maybe helps a little bit to frame. Let me just time myself here for 4 minutes, because I can rabble. So I wanna start with two things. Because the prompt that is situated here by Prof, you know, kind of wants us to go outside perhaps of where we are. So let's think maybe about the context of the world first. So I want to think about when the war in when Israel started bombing Gaza, there were lots of people writing about the men and the women, the men, actually predominantly the women and the children, right? And the concerns around women and children. And in this narrative, right, there was one singular piece I remember that was asking, why is it okay for men to die, right? So the idea that, you know, we feel horrible around, what Israel was doing, particularly for women and children. But for men, this, you know, there was no concern seemingly. And so I wanted for us to think about that for men at war and this idea of hegemonic masculinities and how we think about, men, war, and the kinds of ideas we have around masculinity. So that's the one element. And then the second one is, I was, paging through, Instagram as one does. And I saw these two, to use kind of generic language, two men clearly in a relationship, Black, both of them, masculine, quite buff bodies. And they were holding hands and they were rolling on roller skates, right? So these two men with, kind of with a physique that is kind of, one would consider, quite buff, and they were, in this kind of euphoric state, holding hands on roller skates, kid-like, right? Laughing, and then they fall, and the one falls on top of the other. And so I was thinking about this image I was seeing, and I was thinking about the idea of queer masculinities and queering masculinities. And I was thinking about how queerness itself offers masculinities, particularly hegemonic ones, opening up, right? A space for men to be otherwise, right? For men to be not only with other people, other genders, but with each other otherwise. And so I've been thinking since, I've been asked to be part of this about, the particular, the productivity of queerness and in society, enabling or at least arguing for a space for men to be able to be other than hegemonic. And so I'm hoping that our conversation could move us into, or could, touch a little bit also on, I don't want to say that queer men or gender non-conforming men or, have created, pathways, but to some degree, yes, problematic as some articulations may be. And so as we think about also, right, we were asking about, the politics in South Africa, we're talking about, voting, and we're talking about the kinds of, articulations in the lead up to the elections, right? And the kind of performance of masculinity that is embodied there. And then we think, of course, about what happens in, or what is happening in, other parts of the continent. We think, of course, of, the bills in Uganda and the one in Ghana. And again, right, we think about the kind of particular ways in which, masculine tropes are used within that to articulate a kind of, against a certain way of being, against the way of performing masculinity. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Lwando. Okay. Yes, this is getting very exciting. I really loved the fact that you brought in the readings that you were doing around the siege in Gaza. And the question, I mean, I think that's a very important question, actually, that you posed, that as you were reading, why is it okay for men to die? And I think, yeah, it's also something that, yeah, when we think about masculinities, or we think about queer masculinities, there's a certain kind of erasure that happens because, there's a new shift or a new political move or agenda to make things a little bit different. But I also appreciate that you are offering us a space to think of masculinity, queer masculinities, and opening up for, for all kinds of beings, not just men, but men also for, men of all forms, actually, to be, to embrace something else. And perhaps that's where I will start and link you to how Landa started, because Landa, as you were introducing, you were talking about the challenges that trans men in particular have in terms of navigating masculinities. And there's this kind of, having to be part of the hegemonic masculinity, and also not having the space for the alternative, right? Or not knowing or not having that alternative. And Lwando is now coming on the other hand and saying, well, queer masculinities does make this offering. So I'm inviting now the two of you to start this conversation. So I don't know who wants to tackle first. Lwanda or Landa. And then I'll bring in Mthunzikazi to complicate the two of you.
Yeah, no, I think I can brave a first stab, Prof. So I think both are valid, and I think that's part of the reality of why we have to constantly and iteratively have these conversations and create spaces to try and find the nuances in terms of these realities which are both valid and may coexist, can coexist, possibly do coexist. I do find it, that I was actually writing the notes, like, why should men die? That's a valid question, And I was thinking about the rooting of manhood and, the construction of masculinities, especially traditional, hegemonic, around the body, and how bodies become both objects of social practice as well as agents in how those practices evolve and change over time. So on one hand, even within the queer masculinities, there is the reality that there are shifts and expressions which may dominate for some identities, for some realities, for some expressions more than others. So I think both assertions are true, should coexist, because if we look at, like I said, how masculinities are, almost entrenched in acts, inculturated over time, then those two realities will exist when we look at it as permeating from the body as a source and a site for the establishment of those masculinities. Yeah.
Great, Landa. I just want to do a follow-up before Lwando comes in, because you also mentioned something earlier, which I found quite intriguing, and maybe you can unpack it a little bit for us. You were relating issues around trans men and navigating masculinities, particularly within the healthcare sector or in healthcare. And I want you to say a little bit about that, because we don't want to assume that everybody's on the same kind of in terms of like what are the issues that that we need to be attentive to when we're thinking about trans men and queer masculinities.
Yeah, so I think, like, off the bat, there's the idea, the reality that they are trans denialists, which really want to say, you know what, being trans or gender diverse is a pathology, therefore you need to really go to psychotherapy, to go and see a psychiatrist, psychologist, so that you can move towards the binary heteronormative identity or identities, right? And perform or live your masculinity in line with that. And then you find that in certain instances, when trans individuals try and navigate and enter into the healthcare system, there may be an erasure from healthcare providers who, on the one hand, will outright reject based on the construction of the body, to say, no, you can never claim your identity to be, because sex and gender is one thing, and therefore there's a complete erasure of a person's identity, which is their individual and innate expression of who they are and how they show up in terms of their gender in any space, including healthcare. Therefore, that cuts off the required access to health interventions. Or it could also be that you may find healthcare providers who are, in trying to co-create and navigate the space or the reality with the trans individual, will affirm towards a binary heteronormative view of how the identity ought to evolve and become. So whilst they're affirming the identity within the healthcare space, they are unconsciously reinforcing the stereotypical views, which may be tied to, and in all probabilities, are tied to hegemonic forms of traditional masculinity, which locate how manhood should look, should function, should be, even as a trans or gender diverse young being. So those are some of the challenges which can, in some instances, become very violent, very exclusionary, which then results in almost like the, trans men particularly being invisible in terms of they choose not to enter into these spaces because these spaces are structurally and systemically designed to violate and exclude them, let alone allow them to navigate or try and figure out their evolving identity and masculinities.
Oh, thank you, Landa. Yeah, you unpacked that really well. Thank you so much. So I want to invite Lwando to go back to the conversation. And I also just want to say before Lwando speaks, the chat section is going wild. People from all over. We have a whole contingency from Germany, from Bochum University, and I see all of them. There's people from the US, from the UK, a lot of universities in South Africa. So this is really exciting. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this conversation. So Lwando, let's go ahead.
Thank you for that. So Landa, there's so many things to pick up on from what you're saying and from to think about. So I want to concentrate. The question or the prompt here is particularly around trans masculinities and their relationship to queerness. So I think, even in the way you are speaking now, there's a desire, particularly from trans people and queerness, to understand gender is fluid, right? And there's a resistance to this, right? And so there's the idea around fluidity or movement of gender is troubling. And I think that, trans masculinity, since we're speaking about that particularly, is essentially, it is amazingly a queer masculinity, particularly because it is pushing the boundary around what people think a masculinity is, and so the push here is, Prof was talking earlier on in the opening about thinking about queer masculinities outside of the body, and this is the idea: how do we think gender beyond the body, or how do we think about the being beyond the body? How do we think about people beyond the body? And this is the challenge, right? And I think transness in general, transness as a I don't want to say instrument, but transness as a way of being challenges every structure of our society, right? It challenges, the building environment. Why are the bathrooms this way? It challenges markers, right? About, how the figures on things. It challenges so many structures of society. And to the point that it even challenges other people within the LGBTQI kind of alphabet, right? That even that, because let's be honest, right? Because trans masculinity, even within the kind of, alphabet soup, there are troubles there in that although people accept same-sex desire, right, the idea of a fluid gender, right, is still a struggle to kind of to get people their heads around it. And so we need to ask questions around, so what are we saying when we say masculinity? What is that?
What is masculinity?
What is contained within that? When you say masculinity, what exactly are you saying? And I think for me, this is when I was saying, queerness is productive. It's exactly because for me as a queer theorist or someone who thinks with queerness, transness is a welcomed breakdown of this idea of gender, right? It is a pushing against kind of the fixedness with which we think about these categories.
Yeah. And if we think beyond I mean, if we 100% agree with you, if we think beyond the biomedical, if we tap into the ever-present spiritual, if we think about beyond the body, and if we think about the resistance to recognizing that the sum of a person is not just limited to the natal being, which is exactly what you're saying, and this is me agreeing with you when you're saying being trans in and of itself is pushing beyond and saying, but this is a reality. And there's also a big reluctance, hesitancy, almost unawareness of a distinction or a reality of a gender and a gender identity, which I think is where a lot also still possibly gets lost in translation, understanding, in trying to quantify the, revolution of being trans, of being gender diverse, in allowing one to assert, acknowledge, and reclaim an identity that's beyond just the physical, so fully agree with you there.
Yeah, and just a little thing just to piggy on what you just said now about the question of, there's the question of how do we think beyond the body, right? Queer people, particularly queer people who are invested in our traditions and the spiritual realm, are already right? Thinking about the body, thinking about, being beyond in terms of how people are interacting or speaking or doing, beyond the kind of, physical realm. And so then when we are saying that we practice certain kind of cultures, we believe in this, we believe in that. And yet, right, when it comes to actually really seriously thinking about, what that beyond the body realm does for us, do to us, and the kind of cultural practices we have, what are we saying?
What are we saying?
I just want to put that out there.
And how do we challenge what has become obsolete and what's still relevant in terms of how we construct our norms, our values, our cultural practices, and ways of doing and interacting with each other, but also bigger than the physical. So hundreds.
Great. You two really got into it, right? Very exciting. I love the exchange, and I'm sure a lot of people are also enjoying this conversation. And I think you're actually inviting Mthunzikazi into the conversation, because Mthunzikazi started this and said, well, in the difficulty of finding oneself and finding a language about queerness, about queer masculinity, etc. We need to maybe think beyond what already exists, and think beyond this kind of bodily entrapment, and see what else is possible. Okay, I'm paraphrasing Mthunzikazi. So what you're inviting us to do is to say, okay, well, if we start from the premise of umtu, right, which within the African context is both physical and spiritual, material and non-material, then perhaps we can get somewhere. So Mthunzikazi, let's bring you in and weigh in on this conversation. So you've been hearing what's going on, and what are your thoughts? I know you're having lots of questions as you are writing your thesis also, but now we're asking you as someone who's invested in this kind of bringing back language and creating terms of understanding, but also being expansive and going beyond what Landa and Lwando are talking about, going beyond the physical part of just going beyond the body.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. You please help me translate where I am stuck, because I just want to say Sisenjane, girl. So I don't know what that means in English, because we're not inside the dog. You know, if we should say, let me just say, it's such a murky but also very exciting and extremely challenging and frustrating space of trying to understand. I wanted to talk about now that Lwando and Landa are talking, I'm thinking about the trimmings of patriarchal influences and foundation, because one of the texts that I'm working with of someone who says a lesbian sangom, right? And then if we're talking about umoy, and then this person, the spirit, and then this says, then Gunzi says, then I'm able to, because there's a spirit of a man that I've inhabited that lives within me. So that spirit of a man, when that man particularly wants a woman, I go and find that woman for the man. But you see, again, it goes back to that thing that we should be under, you know, we are still, we are free, but we are under the instruction of this paternal trimmings. Lack of a better word, one. So there are a lot of things going on in my mind. And two, in literature, it says during the frontier wars in the Eastern Cape, Mbungwana and Mayosi tells us that in the homestead, there were men that were there, you know, because men would go to war. So the men that were there is either the men that were injured or men that were old. And these men would wear dresses so that when the helicopters and the soldiers are patrolling, they won't be then forced to go to war because they did not have energy to go. So women would then give them dresses, because I assume at that particular moment, it would be someone's first coat, to be given to this man, so that at that particular moment, that man is safe, you know? But then if I get in as Unonga daughter I'm a rural girl altogether. So if I go there, I'm too much of wannabe kind of a man. So I don't have a space with these women because I am child-free, not childless. I do not have any of the things that I can contribute with, moving from China, culturally, and all of these other things. But also when I'm with these men, you know, and we're sitting there, they either call me a bra. I'm not your bra. They want to call you a bra, Mpinji, you know, or you want to take your girls because they don't know what to do with this body, right? So spiritually, then again, you know, because the important thing is that you say that we need to look at the same time is this thing that it's fine to find names, you know, but at the same time beyond naming, because I'm not one thing, you know. If I go home, that is why I also have an issue with coming out and all of these things, you know, because when you go home, the important thing is who's going to slaughter, who's going to cook, who's going to collect firewood. So when we're having that meeting, we're having a meeting to say what's going to happen. It's not a meeting of who sleeps with who. But at the same time, I'm not saying that I undermine that, but I never speak about my mother, about any issues. The only conversation we had with my 80-year-old mother was during my menstruation period, because I thought I was injured. That was the only time we had that conversation. Since then it was school and all the other things. So I'm sitting there and I say, how do we think, as you ask, Lwando, how do you think beyond the body? But the thing is, when I get into a space, the first thing that comes in is my body. And I'm already then demarcated to a certain corner. Because of the body, I can try different things to squeeze it in, to color it and stuff. But I feel the yoke that is actually just really suffocating us. It's still trapped and founded and covered in masculinity, and it's covered in patriarchal influences. Bro.
Yeah, great. Guys, I loved this phrase you gave, patriarchal trimmings, or the trimmings of patriarch. Yeah, I like this. And I wish we could, have time to talk a little bit about it, because it just, you know, as you were talking, it just gave me the image the image of being in the garden and just trimming my trees. So, and I'm wondering what patriarchy does when it's like, you know, when it trims, what is it trimming, or who's trimming what, etc. So yeah, that's, yeah, it was a very visual phrase. I like that. But also, I mean, yeah, so you're saying to us, well, we can be conceptual as we like, you know, think, be airy-fairy, but the point is, when I walk into a room, I'm still put into this little box of, you know, where does your body fit in? And this then makes us think, you know, like, it's also like a question around, you know, like the joy that some of us take in developing concepts and being theoretical versus the everydayness of life, and what life really asks of us. You've also alluded to, you know, to granddaughter, and both you and I have been writing about this and thinking through it, etc. But you also mentioning the the book A Black Bull, Ancestors of Me by Ngabinde, and how Nkunzi is both in the physical body and also, you know, has the spirit that demands a physical interaction. Which is actually quite interesting. So yeah, the body in that sense becomes a different vessel in the way that it, you know, it satisfies the spirit. Yeah, and yeah, that could be something interesting that we can explore, how the body satisfies the spirit and vice versa. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's it's oh gosh, we're running out of time. I see that there are some people. Tiane on the chat is laughing and saying, "What is patriarchy trimming? It makes me think of Xhosa patriarchy." So, do you want to respond to that, Mthunzikazi?
Okay, so as someone trying to build words, you know, so there are two things, you know, because you can have something, but it's always decorated. So the first trimmings is always decorated with patriarchy, you know, because even there are patriarchal, what Zico calls patriarchal princesses, you know, even when I go there with my body and I'm in that kitchen, they're like, oh, why don't you have this? Why don't you have this? But also, I'm not on a plate, you know? So, because, you know, and then there are also these things that we always want to fit into a certain thing, you know, we don't want to offend the patriarchal uncles and blah, 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 you know. So it's both, it's whatever that you think, but I feel like, that's why I said in the beginning, Sisenjeni anyway, you know. And Sisenjeni, this only starts in 1883. It's not something old. Because we are told in Ghana, we're told in Nigeria, we're told in Lesotho, you know, that it has always been man. Even Makona tells us, Makona writes in Gugululu, my children's children, writes, because he was born in the 1930 something, so writes about her life in the 1940s and how men were not there. So the people that she remembers, it was the grandmother and the roles they used to play from Orai, being around the fire and all of these other things that they were doing. But only now we are set in this thing that you must be this thing. If you look like this thing, you are this thing, you know, and that is patriarchy, but that's something new. This thing of that, these men that they either want to call me a bra so that they can look, they think that they are complimenting me. I don't find it complimentary. I find it, you know, yeah, it's just, and then either they're like, oh, now why are you trying to be like man? And this is the curative rape that Uzanele Moholi talks about. This is what you talk about, Prof, in your work, to say then at that time that it's either you want to look like a man. I get this shirt because it's the one that I want to wear. And it makes me feel nice and cute. And then the other person thinks that, oh, yeah, hey, we brand and you know. So I don't know what that means, you know. And because for me, the important thing is that to a human being. So the desires of the body and how I satisfy the body is not what I talk about when I get to the room. it's not what I do when I do social linguistics, talking about borders and what borders do. I don't get around to talk about that unless I have to at that particular moment. Yeah, well,
I see Lwando is burning. It's like, talk about the desires of the body.
I mean, there are lots of questions in the chat, so, and I want to give time to those, but I just wanted to throw this out. I mean, Mthunzikazi, I agree with you, but I mean, I also am kind of like resisting some of what you're saying in terms of, you know, in good spirit, of course.
No, that's fine.
You know, I mean, you know, what you're saying about, you know, when you enter a room, I mean, this was I think the construction you used, you know, you're read a certain way, or you know, when you enter a room, people read your gender in a particular way. But I mean, but at the same token though, right? When you enter a room as a gender non-conforming person, and someone, you know, if you're you know, you're born male and someone, you know, reads you as female, right? You're already disruptive, right? You're already you're you know, I mean, of course, considering all the, you know, the violent ways this, you know, it can play out, you know, as much as, you know, there's I suppose maybe I also lack a language here, but the fixicity that is desired is already ruptured, right, in that moment. So there is this desire, of course, to fix you, or to, you know, but clearly for the mere fact that they can gender you otherwise, right? There's a recognition, right, that something is broken, or something is not there, or something is not, you know, what normatively can be structured that way. So I think, and so I agree with you that you know, you read, but something is happening there, and so I don't know if we can just let that go, or lose that, or say, you know, nothing is, you know, I'm read in a particular way and that's that. Because I think if I enter a room and, you know, born a boy, and then someone said, you know, you enter a room and someone says, you know, hello sister, or hello chair, whatever, something has happened in that process. Something has happened there that I've done. There's something there that, you know, that umhlaba awusalingani. There's a shift in the ground, and I'm only saying this. We can't give everything to the patriarchy.
Exactly.
We can't give everything to patriarchy. Okay.
No, so Landa, just a bit. I hear you, Landa, and I agree that something has shifted, but that has taken. That's why I said in my opening that I might be taking people aback, because I am only finding myself now. So other people have moved. You know, I haven't even reached the Q in the alphabet. I am still sitting here at the L.
Yeah.
That's where I'm sitting. And that is my problem. I'm still sitting here at the L. I still have to move and understand the others. And you had said it correctly, Lwando, that even us here in the stew or the soup, you know, of the LGBTI or the flag, we are still there. Certain things, if we are honest, there are things that I wouldn't say in spaces like this. I'm like, they'll kill me, you know, but I'm trying to understand. So I'm saying, you are shifting something, because at that particular moment, you're like, okay, I'm disrupting. Even this word disrupt for me is new from university. So guys learning, you know? So when I used to get there, I just didn't want to be called a boy. You know, I just didn't want to be called a boy, but I knew that I also, with the girls, there are certain things, you know, when they were like, okay, no, usfuna ndoni and all of that kind of thing. So I understand you and we agree, but even the word to say I'm disrupting something is not, I'm not just here for the sake, I'm not just here to close a gap. I'm not here as dead wood, sorry to use that kind of word. But all I'm saying is, it's all of these things are new, you know, for me. So I might be taking people that have passed that's a little bit back, but I'm just saying for now, it's only now that I'm doing this because I had to do this after I've written and that stuff. But I was like, there's a thing that I'm not finding in isiXhosa literature. And even my examiners for my masters, they were like, there's witchcraft in the rural areas. Why are you not writing about that?
So they
Landa.
were limiting you to what's already existing and not wanting you to explore beyond that. That's what you're saying.
Because I mean, at that point, I was looking for women like me, because I got that from Makosazana Klaba.
Yeah.
I got that from some of the work that is even erotic that Khabiba would write, you know, that literature that I've been consuming for years. And then when I get to this space, university space, I was like, I wanted something like that in the course. It's implied, and I was helped by some of my friends, including Utiani, to actually get this book up. And then I was reading it for the third time to actually say, oh, there is lesbian love, same-sex love for me. And I'm not queer yet. I'm not a Q yet. I haven't arrived there. When people are saying we're queering the space, no, we went there, this person and that person. The reason that other one is looking that side and that ornament is looking that side because they are queering the space. I'm not there yet. I am not there yet.
And I think you and I have spoken about this in our in our chat.
Landa,
yes, Prof. We needed more time.
Yes, of course you need more time. But the chat section is going wild. And I want to invite some of the people here to weigh in on the conversation. I see there have been lots of comments from Ntombi, from Princess, Ziko, Jen, Shinta, Prince. Yeah, so I'm just asking anybody to, if you want to say something, maybe just ask a question or comment or just a thought. So the space is open for you to do that now as the conversation is going on. Because I think it will take a while to read everything. So let's see if anybody, Shinta, Jen, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is an interesting conversation.
Yes, and please make it short, because now I see there are lots of. Yes.
So I'm thinking of hegemony within the context of, let's say, Gramsci, that whole violence, the state having this monopoly on violence. And masculinity also, I think, probably predates that. And so that the privilege or whatever that we think, or male privilege, or that men have, is derived from that violence or the monopoly on violence, and the sort of the policing of that violence, because masculinity, I think, starts by emasculating women of this sort of capacity for violence by making them sweet, meek, whatever. So Lwando, your question, because I also have that same thing of men, women, and children died. What does it matter? People died. Or why is it always broken down like this, as if maybe some people's death is not so important and some people's is? But can we have this same care towards men if their male privilege is premised on this violence? I don't know. I wanted to hear what people thought about that.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I think that point is noted. So we'll ask people to respond to it. Let's ask Tiane to come in.
Hi everyone. Thank you for this opportunity and this beautiful conversation. I would still like to return the question of defining what is masculinity. Because I feel like that question was not attended to, and I think it's a very fundamental question, just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. That's one. And then two, I mean, I'm asking that question because masculinity articulated in English, carries European connotations of what masculinity is. It comes with capitalism, it comes with colonialism, and that's a very particular understanding of masculinity. And now when you look at, coming back to Mthunzikazi, and when you look at notions of masculinity in SARChI, I would like to hear from you, Mthunzikazi. How would you define masculinity in SARChI? Because when you look at dress in traditional Xhosa attire destabilizes this binary formation of gender. recently I saw a picture of young men who were looking for jobs during the Durban times. They're literally wearing oputi, these big earrings, round earrings, which are now understood to be women's earrings. And I'm like, then if people were wearing these earrings in the past, what shifted? And also when you look at language, language also destabilizes the gender binary. I was reading a paper by, a chapter, I think from your book, Prof. Mathebeni. I think a chapter by Olauluo, who was talking about the Ogu society, where the gender binary is destabilized in language, because then you get female husbands, sorry, which is, and then you also get male mothers. And I found that resonates with isiXhosa, because in isiXhosa, how do I say this? If my father's sister to my mother, no, is Ndodakazi. I want Ndodakazi. There's Utabawo, there's Ndodakazi, which is my father's sister to my mother. And then my uncle is Umalume, and the ma denotes femininity in isiXhosa. And then now when you use English, you end up with uncle and aunt. And so all of that gender nuance in isiXhosa disappears. So again, which brings me back to language, how significant is it? Does it matter that we use English when we define masculinity, when we talk about these issues? Or do they shift when we use our own languages?
Okay, Tiana, thank you. I don't see, let me see if there's other hands. No, I don't see other hands, but Tiana, I do actually want to ask you a question. Because you are pushing Lwando, Landa, and Mthunzikazi for a definition, right? And what you're saying is you're asking, can we talk about the same thing in the definition of masculinity? But you yourself have given us all these different ways, right? Through language, through, European and whatever influences, capitalism, etc. So what is it that makes us, and I'm not asking you specifically, but just thinking, makes us want a definition? Yeah, a definition of masculinity. But maybe that's something we can think about. Yeah.
Okay.
No, you can respond if you want. Do you want to?
No, I think a definition is important, just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, for me, because then we can have a long, never-ending conversation and yet end up speaking past each other. So for me, a definition is important, just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
All right. Okay, cool. Let's so there were two questions, one from Jen Shinta and another from Tiane. So let's see who would like to respond to both of these provocations.
I would like to respond to Tiane's one. Just one. I actually said this to Princess, that I've been to different workshops about queer masculinities, and I still think, and I want to be honest, that I still don't know what is queer masculinity, but if I'm thinking, for me, because I coin words, and I'm thinking, because I think the problem would be if we use the North, if we start from the North to explain our things, I think we're going to be stuck somewhere, because we want to have everything, we want it to have a name. And we're saying sometimes it's about a feeling, because that is why then there are people who are saying I'm gender non-conforming, because it's a feeling and I'm fluid, as Lwando was saying, So I think if we want to put us, we are still removing one box and taking to another box. That is my understanding. 1, 2, for me, when I think about masculinity, then, because I'm in a space where people speak English, and I'm thinking what this masculinity is, and I'm thinking about amandla nobungangamsha. And I think amandla nobungangamsha, power, and I don't know what, Landa, what is ubungangamsha in English? Please help me. Greatness, but that still doesn't give you that.
Yeah.
power and greatness, or or saying, being just badass bitch, kind of thing, So I'm trying to think, and English will fail me in this thing. So for me, when I'm thinking about that, when I'm thinking about masculinity, I'm thinking about amandla nobunganga. I'm sure we had this conversation, Prof. And I think that is why people don't know what to do with this nongaidot. That people don't know what this is booty. That people don't know what to do with this damtura, kind of a thing in different spaces. So for me, I think maybe because we're saying we're spirit, we're saying all the important thing, why you want to define yourself, why you want to find yourself, why you want to flock towards, lack of a better word, flock towards people that are like you, that are like your spaces. And that is why there is LGBTQI space. Then you feel like if I'm with Landa, I don't feel like I have to explain certain things, right? But at the same time, even there, our understanding is at different levels. So a feeling for me, again, I talk masculinities, I'm thinking ubungangamsha, and I'm thinking of power, and that is gender fluid.
Yeah. Power and might. I think for me, if I can just piggyback off that, and then I think, if I may, Dr. Scott will probably help us with Jane's response. Talking about masculinity and defining it, like Mthunzikazi is saying, for me, there's the risk of homogenizing and boxing and removing agency and autonomy, to say we must have this concrete view, an idea of a well-defined narrative that people are going to be forced to assimilate to. And I think, as Mthunzikazi was talking as well, I was thinking about the work of Sobonfu Some from Burkina Faso, who writes about the spirit of intimacy, and how the interaction between body and spirit needs to be like a waltz. We need to find ways to allow all to fully encompass and hold in our identities and expressions, because human beings are beings. They are not going to be restricted to a uni-reality or a uni-existence, which is why, in all probability and probably in all truth, humans embody the elements of masculine and feminine. And in embracing and owning their fullness, they find ways to hold that and express that and live that outside of these predefined and concretized ways of being. As you were speaking, Mthunzikazi, I was thinking about the need to have these neat categories, these boxes that must be ticked, and whether or not this forced assimilation is a matter of gender, or is it when people enter spaces as they are they being gendered or are they being sexed? Because there's also this innate obsession about people's identity being located on their sex characteristics, or at least their natal sex characteristics. And that's where we get those violences and those discriminations, to want to fix and push into this box that has these neat sort of definitions and these neat markers that say, check, unje, check, this is it, check. That is the problem here. And the language, we have to get to a point where we are also okay in admitting that the language of the North, the language of the West, is very exclusionary, and to a large extent, it can be violent because it does not allow for the fullness of indigenous or native languages to fully express when we do need to speak things in a Western manner. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you, Landa. Yeah, you're raising a lot of things here. Oh my gosh, there's so much here on the chat, and I wish people could raise hands and actually talk, because we want to have a conversation. I can't read everything, but
do you want me to read for you, Prof, so that people can then respond? Okay, I can read some of the questions.
Maybe start there. I think it's Angelina. Oh, okay. I don't know where you want to start. Just go ahead. Go for it.
I just have there's a comment. I'll start from the bottom. Love is a letter saying people and things don't need to be, was it removed? Okay, I think it was removed. But Toko Sipungu says, I find the offense in misrecognition or misgendering interesting, Mthunzi. If we say, as Mthunzi and Prof mentioned, a person is both spirit and physicality. Therefore, when the society misgenders, there's also a small moment of recognition there, a recognition that the physical doesn't match the spirit or soul. But because of lack of language, i.e. gender diversity, then the recognition is expressed in ways that are offensive. That's Toko Sipungu. Lavi says, people and things do not need to be constantly defined to be loved or experienced. Language tends to limit us, given the context and how we lose essence in interpretation. Izu Sichinga says, is it possible to reframe and decolonize the language around masculinities while still having the conversation in a foreign framing? That is a question. I see some here. Lisi Wengobe says, I would personally define masculinity as a pattern of practice. I guess that's in response to Tiane. I would personally define masculinity as a pattern of practice, daily performed and maintained. It is also a set of resources drawn on in different times and settings. It is also a concept and a norm. Angeline Stevens, in our beingness, we seem to still seek some kind of sameness, to reaffirm, validate, explore, make sense of our beingness. What is interesting are those aspects that we see as being same or different. I think Shinta, Jen asked, thinking about why it is okay for men to die, masculine hegemony is derived or premised on the monopoly of violence, whether the violence to kill in war or during slaughter. Can masculinity be separated from this violence, both internal and external? And I just say there, I'm also thinking about masculinities in the context of heterosexual men, that queer tribal roles and constructions of hegemonic masculinity. Yeah, so those are the questions. Oh, Zico Dana says, could these patriarchal trimmings be trying to conceal something fragile and unstable in hegemonic patriarchy, as it claims to be the main form of masculinity due to its biologic, cannot or refuses to transcend the body and moves into the spiritual realm? I hope this makes sense, but thank you so much for these provocative insights. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Princess, for reading out all those. So the conversation, this part of the conversation was because of Tiana's question. I'm not sure if Jen's question was answered around the monopoly on violence. And I'm also not sure if Tiana is satisfied, but it doesn't matter. We don't need to be satisfied. I think that's part of engaging. So can we, yeah, so Jen's question and maybe any other comment that was read out that you'd like to respond to. Lwando, do you want to go?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm kind of stuck now on the let me first start with so I mean, I'm interested in the desire for definition. Because there seems to me as if a definition is gonna enable us to arrive at a solution or you know, an explication or like an explanation of how or why things are the way they are. And I think in the way we are having the conversation, which is great and productive, but there's also a force where, right, we are trying to understand, but I think the trouble with gender is exactly that. It is not fully knowable, right? I don't know actually if we can fully know, right? In terms of, because when you think about how one arrives at one's kind of gender identity, and you think about all the things that, you know, get in there for, you know, and the kind of trajectory one has, it's a very difficult thing to kind of try to pin down. And so to use even Tiana's example around, you know, even if we're speaking about, you know, specifically Xhosa, let's say, you know, masculinities, what informs that is impacted and influenced by so many things between, let's say, Khayelitsha and Mthatha, right? Like what produces, you know, what one wants to call it masculinities. You have to account for so many things in between there for us to be able to come to some kind of definition. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing this out there because I think that I think it leads us to the trap of our critique of the very idea of Western understandings of gender, right? In that there's a fixicity, or there's an idea that this thing, you can pin it down and say this is what it is. And transness and queer people are saying, actually, you can't. That's the thing. It's constantly moving. It's constantly, you know, anyway. That's all I would say about that. But I think the question around violence is very important, because I think, you know, I struggle to think about violence, and particularly gender violence and violence towards queer people in our South African context, because, you know, the conversation around it, there's so much, including, you know, spa adverts on GBV, which it's just so much that it's difficult to sci-fi and to think about it. But I will say this around the kind of thing I threw out about, you know, there's the seriousness with which we need to really rethink how, you know, it is okay for men to be at war, you know, and I'll end at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Lwando. I think you're opening up another other things that we can definitely unpack. But I mean, the conversation has, I know it was specifically curated to have a conversation between 3 people based within a South African context and working in that context. But we have many people from other places. And I'm curious to see, especially because Lwando was saying, well, in this search for defining things, not necessarily just masculinity, but in this search of definition, there is this kind of like limitation about where things come from, where certain ideas come from, and how these ideas then end up shaping what becomes knowledge in a particular context. So this is also an invitation for people who are not located within or working within a South African context to, you know, to pitch in and say how for them queer masculinities has been useful as a thing that is, you know, that is visible in a particular way or not, or how that is being seen. So yeah, also just weigh in on the conversation generally. So yeah, this is an invitation to people in the platform to just say, yeah. And I know there are people from different places in the world, so and I can call them out, but I won't. So I would but we would like to hear your voice and to hear what you are thinking. Yeah, I just want to put the light on. Okay. So yeah, so we've had like a fully like this really, I mean, we started with, you know, the 3 of you giving us these ideas, thinking about transness, thinking about language, and thinking about war. And we haven't really thought much about it, to be honest, about the latter. We've been referring to it. And I wonder, because I think it's important, I mean, at this time, and some of us are in spaces or work in spaces that are going through war, or we are all impacted by what is going on in the world at the moment. it has significant effects on how we think about existing, how we think about being, and who is allowed to, you know, to exist, who is allowed to survive, and also under what conditions. And perhaps we can think a little bit about where this conversation is in terms of this moment, in terms of, you know, in terms of the challenges that are posed on certain bodies, certain locations. Going back to your to you, Lwando, and your thoughts. So I'm curious to hear how you're reflecting on this at the moment.
You know, you know, I've been thinking about this, you know, in you know, the what you said now about you just threw me a little bit about, you know, which bodies, which people are allowed, or who's you know, I mean, that the Judith Butler question, right? Who's mournable, right? Whose life matters, and who's legitimate, right? I mean, I think here, of course, about, you know, homosexuality is un-African, so tired, like that trope, right? But it's all about legitimacy, right? It's about who registers under the banner of human. And I think, you know, the bombing of Gaza, it really brings us, I mean, it's been happening for a long time, but I think October 7th has brought us and has brought the world to such a place where we're really, I mean, I get goosebumps even thinking about this, thinking about who really matters, right? And who's legible under, you know, the category of human, and who's fine to send bombs on. And this is not, and I think, you know, this is not a far question from the queer question, right? This is not, so the question of Gaza in that sense is not far from the queer question in terms of legitimacy, in terms of who exists under the banner of human, who is allowed to live, who is allowed to express. And that very, very important question there you asked about, under what conditions, right? Because this is the thing in the South African, now to bring it really to the South African context, right? Where we speak, or we have the kind of legislation that, you know, is whipped out all the time by whoever to say, you know, we have this, you know, shining document that's the Constitution, and marriage, and then we want to think about, but what are the conditions are queer people in this place? And I want to say trans people particularly living under in this particular space. And so the question of violence and the question of war is quite intertwined with the question of queerness. And I wondered, just to segue, if when you were saying institution, if you were going to invoke, you know, the conditions of Fort Hare, but maybe that was going too far. But I will close. I'm hoping other people can pick up from what, you know, from that. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lwando. Yeah.
And I pick up where Lwando says, yeah, who matters? I was thinking, who gets legitimized, like you were saying, and who does that benefit? Because that is the construction of the world that we live in, right? The binary itself, if we look at why is the binary a necessary condition to vet one as a human? What are the conditions of this? Who does this benefit? What is the end? And I'm thinking, you know, I thought about within the context of war and the ever sort of the dark hole of war that queer people constantly find themselves in, always having to navigate and negotiate access to their own autonomy, to their own agency in any context. If we just look at the African context and the bills that are getting passed, the laws that are getting passed in 2024. But I also thought about trans people, and I thought back to COVID. I mean, that was a war on another level, you know, and I'm thinking healthcare now. And when the globe was going through this particular war, all interventions were cut. Pharmaceuticals stopped producing necessary life-changing interventions, which have been shown to be beneficial to the mental health and wellness and just holistic health, wellness of being a trans person, a gender diverse person who needs that access. So war really is a very unkind, violent terrain that I think queer people are constantly having to navigate. And if we look at the current wars, I mean, I've read accounts of individuals who are trans who've had to flee and lose that critical access to life-saving interventions, but also the targeted violence in some instances where there's specific targets on them for being trans or gender diverse. So it's a layered, it's a complex, it's a never ending, and it's a loaded reality that I feel always seeks to exclude, to erase. And it all goes back to who benefits by the binary or from the forced heteronormative binary being the legitimate vetting tool of being a human.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Landa, for that. So I want to wrap up, and maybe Mthunzikazi, if you have a final thought that you want to put forward. Can you put your mic on, please?
Thank you, Prof. Thank you to everyone. I'm reading what Linda sorry if I'm butchering your surname there. Yeah, it's I think it was someone saying, it was Tian there in the chats, that it's never ending, you know. It's always change. It always changes, you know, and I think as it should, because we are trying to find ways. We are trying to reopen our eyes, you know, because the lenses that we're using were somebody's spectacles, you know. So we are trying to find things. And I am also, as I was saying, that the fixation with defining things might delay us, but at the same time, things that do not have names, they get lost in the wind, you know, because everything, even if it's dead, you know, it's naming. So the whole thing, the onomastic discipline, you know, like the whole thing is having a name, you know. But it means then if we can't, the ones that are here are not fitting or are actually like suffocating us, we need to then find names, and also rely too much maybe on the feeling than the outer layer of a human being. Yeah, so this is interesting. I'm gonna go back and then rethink what I've said, and then go back and yeah. And also thinking about the last thing, Prof, I was thinking about the laws. As I was thinking about the buildings, because a lot of people in my family are in the construction sector, you know, because labor, that kind of labor, you know. That there's a building that collapsed in George, you know, and then we're told how many men and how many women have passed on, you know, have lost their lives there. And then it's like these laws and this negligency that do you want to be dead and be no, and you were not You were not saying, you were not conforming to the gender that you were given at birth that says you're a man. And then we have a constitution, but that constitution does not recognize that, you know? So yeah, I get more confused the more I talk and the more I write, the more I read, you know, but I guess we're going somewhere, I don't know where. Thanks.
All right, well, we are somewhere, and that is at the end of our conversation, which has opened up a whole lot of things. Starting, as I said, you know, the introductions around thinking about trans and healthcare, thinking about language, and thinking about, as Lwando was asking us to think about, like who matters, or who registers under the banner of human. So even as we think about this notion of gender and queer masculinity, I think it brings us back to this idea of asking, as Tiana was saying, what really is it? What is this thing that we are talking about? And so even though, I mean, I know we were trying to, dance around Tiana's question, but it is actually quite an important question. What is that that we are talking about? But also, what does this thing do? And I think that's also a very important question, because it lands us at this conversation where actually there's so much that is left out of the thing that we're not saying. So yeah, and also, I mean, I think it's also an invitation to say, what else can we offer to this thing? Once we've named it, once we've defined it, what else can we offer to it? And say, actually, this is not the thing that works, or this is not the thing that we want. And maybe in a different way to say, there's also an opportunity. And I like the fact that, Tiana, I'm bringing you back here again. Like the fact that Tiana, in your question, you asked, what is the thing? And sometimes we think things don't matter. They are insignificant. Whereas actually it is precisely the fact that there are things that matters. And things are I think they're very generative. They allow us to not give them, a gender, unless you speak German and then it's a D or a das, but or it has a masculine or whatever. But in many contexts, things exist as they are, and so this question, what is the thing that we are talking about? We should take it seriously as, how can we unpack this thing so that it really becomes a thing that is an expensive thing? So this is just to say thank you so much for this conversation and for wonderful provocations. And it's been so beautiful. Thank you, Princess, for putting us all together into this conversation. And thank you to Gillian for the opening up the space. And to the whole team at Canon Collins, really thank you. And thanks to you, Lwando, Landa, and Mthunzikazi, for really an amazing conversation. And I wish we could have more of these. And maybe in the next one, we can talk about the thing, because Mthunzikazi actually writes about the thing and calls it Indo. And I've responded to that in a different piece. So yeah, so thank you so much. And I wish you all a beautiful evening and a wonderful weekend.